Morning, everyone. My name is Craig Sell, and I'm the Director of Association Development for PACE. And welcome to day 2 of PACE ACX21. I hope you all enjoyed the speakers and the sessions and the social as much as I did. We started out our day, as you well know, with the incredible Myra Golden, who shared with her insights on taking the first step with urgency, focus, and all hands on deck as it relates to any crisis. It was a powerful, motivational information for us. Now, just a reminder to you all that all of our sessions are recorded and will be available at the conclusion of our event. And so you have the ability to enjoy it for the first time, or you can listen to it over and over again. Today, we have another full day of insightful sessions and speakers, as well as our Compliance Officers Live forum, and then another social at the end of the day. We also want to remind everybody to save the date for our in-person ACX22 at Amelia Island in March of 2022. Right now, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome Jeff Backstrom of Grupo NGN, who is Product Director. Grupo is a proud member and sponsor of PACE and has been for years. And I'm excited to be able to turn this now over to my good friend, Jeff, who will introduce our keynote speaker today. Thank you and welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. I'm very excited to introduce Nicholas today. And this is the perfect session for Grupo NGN to be sponsoring, as we have this focus on customer experience and CX. I joined Grupo a couple years ago as part of an acquisition of a startup company that I was with our gamification and performance dashboard product. And joining a company through an acquisition is an interesting experience, because you're essentially a new hire, but you didn't go through the traditional interview and everything process. And one of the great memories I have is, as I was doing my onboarding and meeting with each member of the executive team and the management team, it almost became a running joke for me that in each of these individual meetings that people would bring up, oh, and this customer, oh, and by the way, this is our original customer from over 20 years ago, and they're still with us. And did you note that we've not lost a customer in X number of years? And was literally repeated as mantra from everybody, and I just fell in love and have found myself to be a natural fit with the Grupo NGN team because of that significant customer focus. Now, as far as Nicholas goes, I had the opportunity to meet with him last week, and I am very excited to introduce him. Nicholas Zeisler is a fractional chief customer officer, a CX strategist, and a former Fortune 100 customer experience executive. He's the principal of Zeisler Consulting. He's worked with corporations, small and large, public and private, and in industries from energy to tech to healthcare and public works. His organizing philosophy is that the voice of the customer will do you no good unless you're doing something with it. So his framework includes customer insights, process engineering, creating and supporting a deliberate customer-centric culture. And his new book is We're Doing CX Wrong and How to Get It Right. Now, Z is also a U.S. Air Force reservist, which I definitely respect as a former Army brat myself. And he's actually a professor of statistics at the Air Force Academy. Lives in Denver, Colorado with his partner and their awesome dog. And I was joking with Nick last week that when I took statistics as a freshman in college, the only thing I remembered was the quote in the opening cover of my Stats 101 book, which was, "There are lies, damn lies, and statistics." And I'm really excited for you all to kind of hear Z's take on how to effectively utilize CX. So one quick technical thing with Zoom before I hand it over, and that is for the best experience, if you mouse over and go to the upper right-hand corner, you have your view options. I recommend selecting that to be the speaker view option instead of the gallery view option. And with that, Z, take it over.
Jeff, thank you. Thanks so very much. It's an honor to be here, to be present with you. It's an honor to be sponsored by Grupo and Jeff to talk with you again. And it's humbling to share the stage with Myra, the virtual stage with Myra. Looking forward to getting back in person in the not so distant future, ideally. But for the meantime, greetings from beautiful, colorful Colorado in the Mile High city of Denver. And thanks to Pace for having me here. When I was approached to talk about customer experience and customer care, customer support, customer service, customer success, and how it is that they work together, the first thought that I had was going back to the old commercial for Reese's and getting chocolate in my peanut butter and you getting your peanut butter in my chocolate. Those of an age will get that joke, but the idea is that it's two great tastes that taste great together, as the tagline for that commercial was. And in that sense, I'm inspired to chat with you, this great audience that does customer care and customer support for a living and works in contact centers and has interactions directly with the customer on a regular basis, because that's so integral to what it is that CX is all about. And what's nice is that in the spirit of getting your chocolate and my peanut butter and my chocolate and your peanut butter and my peanut butter all over your chocolate, is that we work together well. And quite frankly, for you, CX can actually be the key to making your life as a customer support or customer service or customer success or customer care professional even better. And that's one of the things that I want to explore today. We talk a little bit about my philosophy, my approach to CX, but then also about the incredible role that CX plays in the CS world and the CS world plays in CX. So with that in mind, and with that spirit of collaboration, let's move forward. I talk to you a little bit about what we'll discuss, talk about CX, what is it, what it's all about, and then I'll talk about CX as a function, as an organization within your company, which is to say, we can talk philosophically about CX and what CX is, but if you have an office of the customer, if you have a customer, chief customer officer, what is that person, what is that organization doing, and what's their role within your organization? And then most importantly, then, what we do together and what we can accomplish together, these two very customer-centric roles. So let's get started with what customer experience is. We can break it down, a customer experience, into many different definitions. First, it can be transactional. It could be, I went to the grocery store today and the produce was nice and fresh and the person at the checkout counter was very friendly and it was an efficient transaction. And I left happy and with all of the things that I wanted and in good time. So that's an independent, transactional, instantaneous experience that I'm having at that grocery store. That can be considered a customer experience. Another way of viewing customer experience could be a journey, which is to say it's longitudinal in nature. I went to your website and I searched and found a product on your website that I wanted. I put it into your online checkout, put it into my shopping cart, went to the checkout. A couple days later, it was delivered. I used it and loved it for a certain number of years, frankly, and then eventually it broke, but it didn't break and upset me. It certainly lasted long enough, and I was satisfied with the experience that I had with it, so that I kind of went through and did the whole thing again, went back to your website, bought another one, delivered it. I used it again, and several years later, broken again, and it's time to go back for another one. And this is a journey. I have many different touch points with your brand, with your company, all along the way. And the collection of all of those experiences turns into my customer experience with your brand. So you see, the transactional event turns, when they're collected, into a journey, and that's a relationship that you're building with me as a customer. That can be seen as customer experience as well. Another way to view customer experience is reputational, which is to say that I just had that journey experience with your brand, but I've got a network of friends. You've got a network of friends and coworkers and family and people that you're sharing those experiences with. In this way, a collection of those transactional events and a collection over many people of those journeys is something that builds up reputationally into your brand's CX. And that's why when we talk about certain brands having great CX, what we're talking about is they take care to deliberately try to develop those experiences, build them into journeys, and then reliably sustain that effort over and over and over again so that they gain a reputation and become known as an organization that, quote unquote, has good CX. So that's a way to think about what CX is in the sense of what is a customer experience. We talk about customer experience, on the other hand, in today's conversation and in the framework of what we're discussing for today's presentation. Let's talk instead about customer experience as a no-kidding operation, which is to say there is a group, there is a department, there is a division, there is something in your organization, some sort of function within your organization that does things centered around customer experience. It's the customer experience division or the customer experience department, or what I like to call the office of the customer. So we're talking about the customer experiences as instances, as journeys, and as a reputation. Now let's turn internally into the corporation and understand what customer experience is as a no-kidding function within your organization. So when we think about that, let's talk first about why you have an office of the customer in the first place. Why do you go to the expense and to the effort and to the work to instantiate this group, this organization, this division? The purpose of having an operational CX function comes down to this. The job of that organization is going to be to fulfill this mission. It's to align what you say you're all about with the experiences that your customers have when they interact with your brand, which is to say what we were just talking about, those customer experiences, the transactional, the journey, and the reputational. You're putting an office, putting a function in charge of making sure that those experiences are aligned. Let's break down this statement really quick. Align is the verb here, and I want to make sure that that's understood. The whole purpose of doing CX, of having CX, is to drive what we call a brand alignment. And that brand alignment is an active thing that you have to pursue. You have to deliberately and on purpose put effort into driving that alignment. And so we use the verb align. What are you trying to align? You're trying to align those experiences that your customers are having. What I was just describing as your transactional, journey, and reputational customer experience. That's out there. That's in the ether, and it does exist. Whether you are deliberately trying to align it or not, it's happening. If you have a customer experience operation, if you have an office of the customer within your organization, within your company, its job is to specifically and explicitly concentrate on those experiences and to align them and develop them with an eye towards what you say you're all about. And when I say what you say you're all about, I'm talking about your mission and your vision, your corporate principles, and your values, your company's values. What I like to boil down into your brand promise. The whole core of this is about your brand promise. Now, we talk a little bit about that. I'm not coining any sort of new phrase or a new term. I'm not a marketing genius or anything like that. When I talk about a brand promise, I'm talking about all those things, your mission and vision. I'm talking about your corporate principles and your values. Basically, what I like to say is what you have etched in granite down in the lobby of your building, what you say and you try to project to the world about what you do. Well, let's meld that also with the role you're trying to play in the lives of your customers. When we talk about brand promise, it isn't simply your corporate mission and vision statements. It's also the niche that you intend to fill in the marketplace. For example, you might be a discount brand, which is to say that your goal is to save your customers money when they buy your products or buy your services. On the other end of the scale, you might be a luxury brand, which is to say, well, you'll surely cost a bit more than that discount brand, but your goal, your brand promise is to deliver an exceptional, superlative service and experience every time your customers interact with your brand. To different brand promises, but you have to know what your brand promise is if you want to make CX successful, because all of CX centers right on that brand promise. Keep in mind, the idea of CX and the reason you have CX is to align that brand promise with the experiences that your customers are having in the real world. So with that understood, let's talk about the definition of what this operational CX function is. There's a lot of words here, and if you got the book ahead of time, you've seen this in print anyway, so I'm not going to necessarily belabor it, other than to say that there are some important chunks to this. It's enterprise-wide, which is to say that your CX function is going to interact with and affect all of your company, everything from your product to your support organization, surely to your marketing and sales. In fact, for that matter, your accounts receivable. So heads up, CFO is actually going to be affected by what you do, because everything that your CX organization does, your office of the customer, is around aligning all of those touch points with your brand promise. So everybody's going to have to be on board, and everybody's going to be affected by that. Also, the nice thing about having an office of the customer where it's centrally located and that strategy is driven from that top is that it's integrated as well, which is to say your CXO, your CCO, your chief customer officer in the office of the customer is going to work among and with all of the other organizations within your company and help drive that integrated and aligned operation. All right, now onto the verb of this one is developing. And the reason that I say developing is because you're going to be doing basically process improvement when it comes to CX. You're going to be improving the things that you do, changing the way that you do the business that you do in order to drive that brand alignment. So you might be improving your processes in the typical process improvement, continuous process improvement, BPI approach. You may be tweaking and improving and changing how you do the things that you do, but you may be developing and creating from scratch processes that you don't even have, especially if you're a startup or if you're a new organization and you haven't yet even built out all the processes. CX is going to play a huge role in how you develop and build your processes in the first place. What's more, you may even be destructing and reconstructing what your processes are if they're actually getting in the way of that brand alignment. The key here is that this organization is responsible and has the authority to take action. One of the biggest mistakes I see in the world of CX is hiring on a chief customer officer, giving that person the authority to staff an entire organization, an entire office of the customer, and then not giving that person the authority to actually make changes. And so you get job descriptions for chief customer officers that say, well, this person's here to build consensus, or the ideal candidate will come in here and share the importance and the brilliance of being customer centric, without necessarily giving this person any authority or any responsibility to actually drive change and develop an organization's processes. So keep in mind that CX as a function is active. It is doing stuff. Most important thing is that it is very active and it's vibrant. It is moving. It is changing things. It is building stuff within your organization. So with that in mind, here's the framework. And again, if you've seen the book, you've seen this, so I'll just briefly go over this. It starts with brand alignment. Keep in mind, the purpose of CX is not, now watch this, this is going to be controversial. It is not sales. It is not revenue. It is not market share. And I know if any of my CX friends are on the line right now, their heads are about to explode because they're saying, don't blow up our spot. It's all about ROI of CX. But whenever I talk about the ROI of CX, or when any a business leader or potential client of mine says, tell me about why I should pay the expense to staff an entire office of the customer and hire a chief customer officer, what's my return on that investment going to be? I always say, let's look at it this way. Do you believe that if there is no gap between your brand promise and the experiences that your customers have when they interact with your brand, would that result in positive business outcomes? Would your sales go up? Would your revenue go up? Would your market share increase? And all around the oak table, I always get a bunch of nodding heads. Well, of course, yeah, definitely. We put a lot of effort and a lot of thought and sincerely subscribe to and believe in our brand promise. In fact, the reason we created that brand promise, which is to say the mission and the vision, the values and the corporate principles that we espouse, is because we believe that's the key. That's the answer to positive business outcomes. Well, great. You have sold yourself on the ROI of CX, because if that's what you believe, and I think most business leaders do believe that, then that's why you have to have CX within your organization, because you've given strategic responsibility to an organization to drive that alignment. Now, keep in mind, your brand promise may be different than, say, your next competitor, but everything about what you do should be in furtherance of driving that alignment between your brand promise and your customers' experiences. If you don't start your endeavors towards CX and doing CX within your organization from this foundation, I guarantee you're going to have much harder work ahead of you, and your outcomes probably won't be what you're expecting. All right. So once you've got that figured out, and once you've got that standardized within your organization, the next thing is to start putting things together. And here we'll talk about the moving pieces of your CX organization. We'll start off with insights. Your insights division, and by the way, I'm going to say division or department, depending on the size of your organization, this is completely scalable. You may not have to go out and hire 2 or 3 or 4 dozen people to man your office of the customer. You might not have to staff with tons and tons of people. You might just have someone who's responsible for insights. That'd be an analyst or an expert in the voice of the customer or something like that. So it's scalable depending on where you are in your journey as a corporation. But you definitely need someone or some entity responsible for gathering and interpreting and analyzing your customers' insights. Again, I alluded to voice of the customers, who we're all familiar with things like surveys and customer interviews. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the concept of walking in the customer's shoes, which is to say, experiencing your processes from the outside so that you know what your customers are going through and you experience it yourself. No better teacher about what your customers are going through and what your customers are experiencing than you experiencing those things yourself. So you have an entire function within your office of the customer that's responsible not only for collecting and soliciting that feedback, but also analyzing it and turning it into something actionable. And that's where the next part comes in, and that's process engineering. Now, as a caveat, I come into CX from the process engineering world. Lean Six Sigma Black Belt here, certified Scrum Master. I've done all of that stuff. Here's the magic sauce about CX and a CX organization. Far too many people think that all you need for good CX, to do CX in your organization, is send out surveys and put up your NPS score out there. Talk about that score here in just a second. But that's really only the beginning of your CX journey. The real key and the real answer is to take action. If you're not doing anything with those insights that you get from your voice of the customer program, from walking in your customer's shoes, from surveying your customers, from interviewing your customers, not only are you wasting all the effort that went into that insights action, but you're also kind of insulting your customers. Your feedback is very important to us. We've all seen that, right? Well, you can show that it's important to you by actually doing something and fixing the things and changing the things that you do to drive that brand alignment. Okay. There's another mistake that a lot of people make when it comes to doing CX, and that is to think that the CX culture is all there is to it, which is to say, we put up a bunch of banners, we've handed out a lot of t-shirts, here's a keychain, right? We send the folks in our CS organization to finishing school practically to teach them how to be nice on the phone. Well, yeah, that's great. And it's kind of a no-brainer. But there are actually deliberate things you can do to drive a positive customer-centric culture. And there's a framework within a framework here, and it starts off with enabling. You have to make sure, and I'm sure that this audience today here can definitely appreciate this. If you're on the front line, if you're in a contact center, if you're part of the customer care or customer support or customer service organization, you need the tools that are required to take care of your customers. Huge part of the CX culture and driving a customer-centric culture in your organization is making sure that the people who are interacting with your customers, the folks that are here today in this audience, have the tools that are necessary in order to do that. Second part of this, though, is empowerment. If those folks, your front line, aren't empowered to actually leverage those tools, and the tools are doing them no good either anyway. If everything takes an escalation, if your frontline employees are not allowed to leverage those great tools that you've given them, then you should have saved your money and not bothered the tools in the first place. The third E in the CX culture framework is to encourage. And it's one thing to come around and pat everybody on the back and say, this is great, this is awesome. Again, we're back to banners and t-shirts and key rings, but there's nothing more encouraging for your organization than to see the top level brass pay attention to and invest their time and energy in seeing to it that these other things are happening, that insights are being collected from your customers, and of course, most importantly, that those insights are acted upon. There's also a little cycle within the CX culture part of this framework too, whereby your leaders are also asking and soliciting feedback from your employees. Are you enabled? Do you have the tools that you need to take care of your customers? And then, are you empowered? Are our processes, are our systems allowing you? Do you have the authority to leverage them, to use them, or is everything an escalation? Taking action on that goes a long way, frankly, much farther than t-shirts and banners, in showing and encouraging your organization to be a CX culture and a customer-centric culture. Now, as I said before, this is just a framework. Your mileage may vary. Your scaling might be different. If you're going to put it in an office of the customer, it might not necessarily be an entire division or entire department, but it definitely has to start with that brand alignment. Okay. Let's talk now that we've established what an office of the customer is and what an office of the customer does and what doing CX within an organization, within a company is going to look like. And let's compare that to and contrast it with and see how it works together with CS. Now, when I say CS for purposes of this conversation, I'm talking about customer support, customer care, customer service, and customer success. I have, with all due respect, I started my CX life in a CS organization. So I recognize that there are differences between those four things. Somebody from outside might not necessarily recognize that, but with all respect, I do recognize that those are not the same thing. Customer support is not the same as customer service. Customer service is not the same as customer success, right? With that understanding though, for purposes of this discussion, the way that they all differ from CX is the same, and that's what I'm going to share with you right now. So walking through in very, very broad steps, what CS does is kind of like this. Your customers have an issue. It may not be a huge issue. It may be that you're anticipating an issue, but there's something going on. Customer is going to call you perhaps. And I know there are other ways that this can happen, but just work with me here for just a second. Customers call, hey, the flange inside my widget is broken. I think I need a new flange. So whether your job is customer care, customer support, customer service, or customer success, your job is very straightforward. We've got to either get the team on top of this, we've got to send in a new flange or send a team out, send a technician out to remove the old flange and insert a brand new flange and get our customers up and running. Or maybe we'll put one in the supply chain and send it, overnight it to the customer, and then get them on the phone the first thing in the morning and walk them through the process of replacing their flange, have them turn it off and turn the widget back on again, make sure it's working properly, right? You can appreciate all of these things. And in a sense, each of these organizations does something along those lines, whether it's service and it's part of a service agreement and it's simply your job, or whether it's support or customer care and you're getting a customer back up and running again based on a warranty or something like that, or whether you're part of an account team and your customer success. Maybe even you anticipate it as part of one of those organizations. Say, for example, a customer success organization says, well, we realize that these flanges usually go out about once every 3 or 4 quarters. And so about that frequency, we actually proactively reach out to the customer and say, hey, your flange is probably about to break. The order of these things may be different, but the point is just the same. Keep that customer up and running, or get that customer back on his or her feet. Making your customers whole is the goal of these organizations. What's wrong with your flange? Let's get your flange replaced. I'm saying flange a lot, but I hope you can appreciate the point here. Here's the thing. The difference between CX and CS is that while that's the motion that CS is going to go through, CX looks at this situation and says, why do we have so many flanges breaking? And then ironically, because we're all about the customer and customer centricity and talking about customer, CX turns internally and says, let's look at how we develop our widgets. Let's look at the engineering process. Let's look at our supply chain and our suppliers of sub flanges or doohickeys, or maybe it's the way that it hooks into the notch inside of the widget. Let's look at how we do things and improve the way we do things and the way we engineer our product or the way we deliver our service, and fix that so that our customers don't need CS to do that. Now, together, CS and CX work in tremendous tandem. And so we get to the question of, what about us? CS, what role does CS play in the CX, firmament, if you will? What role does CS play in that operational customer experience journey that our company is going to take when we hire an office of the customer? Well, in order to investigate that, let's talk a little bit about kind of an origin story. We're going to do some archaeology. As I'd said, I came to CX from the world of process engineering and process improvement. So for me, it's always been about action. But generally speaking, the practice and the discipline of customer experience had its start when enterprising CS people like yourselves, the folks that are in this audience today, noticed either anecdotally, or maybe you were kind of keeping tick marks and thinking to yourself, what's driving me crazy is we're always getting calls about this. Our customers are continuously falling down when it comes to this part of our process. This thing in what we develop, this part of our product is failing frequently, or our customers have a real problem understanding this part of the process that we use to deliver our service to them. Whatever it is, it came from the front line of our organizations, our customer support, customer service, customer care, and customer success teams that noticed and identified problems with the way we deliver our products or services to our customers and said, you know what, let's fix that, rather than constantly taking calls on that. And maybe then what we can do is move on to the next big problem. That's really how CX got its start. And two things can be true, because it could have been possibly that CS people are thinking, oh my gosh, I'm getting tired of all these same questions over and over again, and I want to save myself frustration. But at the same time, in solving those problems, in putting our effort and our resource into fundamentally improving the systems and the processes and procedures of how we do what we do, not only does that make life for the CS person easier, but, well, obviously it improves the lives for our customers. So now that we actually have an entire organization that's dedicated to those improvements, to that development of our systems, how then can we participate? What do we do in the CS field? What we want is a field manual to tell us, how do we impact customer experience, and how do we play along with the CX function, with that office of the customer? And here's what we'll do: break it down along the same lines that we were talking about for the framework itself. We'll start off with insights, customer insights. It amazes me how many clients and how many organizations that I encounter aren't leveraging the tremendous the trove of information that's available within their CS organizations, right? Considering that CX began probably historically in CS organizations, now that it's taken on its life of its own, the VOC, the Insights program, is all about interviewing and surveying our customers without doing the smart thing, which is looking internally. If you're a SaaS organization, your customers are tapping into your very systems every day. Are you monitoring that? Are you looking for trouble that your customers are having? Are you leveraging the insights that your customer care and contact centers can give you about the type of information that you can learn from where your customers are having problems with your brand? If you're in the CS organization, I recommend keeping notes, keeping tab, crack into your CRM, look at your help desk tickets. What are your customers having the most trouble with? Next thing you know, you've got this Pareto chart that you can take right down the hallway into your product organization, right down the hallway into your marketing and your finance organization, and say, this is where we're falling short. Participate in that. Be eager to share that information, especially with the Insights organization within your office of the customer. Moving on to process engineering. Look, like I said, I'm a black belt guy. I'm a process improvement nerd. The best thing that can ever happen in any organization is an embracing of process engineering as a tool for improvement. If you are in the customer care, customer service organization, if you're on the front line, if you work in a contact center, ask your boss for an opportunity to participate in these process engineering efforts. First of all, it'll be more fulfilling for you, and you'll get more excited about customer experience because you're involved in the process. Secondly, no good process engineering, process improvement effort is going to be worth its time if they're not including the customer and the end user in their process of improvement. Sometimes that's not possible. You can't always recruit your customers and make them part of the beta testing. But the next best thing is to leverage this team, the folks who are on this call today, who are in most direct touch with the customers, who are experiencing what their customers are experiencing vicariously through those calls all day and every day, to say, look, you're the closest to the customer. What do you think about this improvement or in this enhancement? Or you helped us thinking about customer insights. You helped us identify problems that our customers are having. Do you think this solution would help? Would this solution help? So look for a participation in these process engineering efforts. When it comes to CX culture, keep in mind those 3 E's: enable, empower, and encourage. If you're working on the front line, escalate, make a voice for yourself and saying, these are the tools that we need. Our customers are calling in with these problems most of the time. These are the tools that are required to solve those problems. Boss, this is the problem, or this is the tool that I need. If you're creating better tools, and look, I know what it's like. I've seen these contact centers with 8,000-10,000 windows all open, and everybody's got their trick, and everybody's got their tools, and everybody's got their workarounds. Share those, codify those, make those part of the improvement processes. And in so doing, what you're doing is talking about enabling, right? If you're a supervisor, make sure that you're empowering your employees to the greatest degree that you're able to, that you're allowed to. Make sure that you push down as many decisions and the authority level for everything that's possible to the most in touch with the customer level, the closest level to your customer. That front line should be making as many of the decisions as possible. And if you're a supervisor and you're finding that that's not the case because it's the rules that are getting in the way, you escalate that up the chain of command and say, look, we need to better empower our employees, right? When it comes to encouragement, obviously, there are banners, there are t-shirts, and there are keychains, and those play a role. Also, though, everybody here in positions of authority, make sure that you're encouraging everybody to listen to what your customers have to say and act on what they're telling you, whether it's deliberate through the course of interviews and surveys, or whether it's observation based on working there on the front line. Finally, brand alignment. The way that we in CS play a role in brand alignment is to question. Always question everything that you do as to whether or not it advances your brand promise. Our customers have to fill this out in triplicate. Why is that? Does that advance our brand promise? Why are we having our customers fill this out in triplicate? Is there a way that we can do this and take the burden off of them? Can we automate this or that process? Can we remove this or that step of a complicated process? Always ask yourself if the work that you're doing right now advances that brand promise and eliminates the gap between your brand promise and what it is that your customers are experiencing. Sometimes it's the boy pointing out that the emperor has no clothes that makes the biggest difference. Raise your voice if you feel that the things that you're doing in your organization are not advancing your brand promise. Question whether or not the current policies and procedures and rules that you have in place, the tools that you're given to use, actually advance that brand promise. Because ultimately, when that's what we're doing, that's CX, customer experience, and CS, customer support, customer care, customer service, and customer success working together. And as I said earlier, those are the two great tastes that taste great together. That's the key. That's the answer. If you're leveraging the work that your CX organization is trying to do, and if your CX organization is doing it right, that's the answer to making your life as a CS professional even easier. It'll actually impact your day and make your job easier, make you happier too, because of course we are all here to make our customers' lives easier, and our jobs are more fulfilling, and our work is a lot more enjoyable when we're not getting in our own way. And corporately, we can do that if customer support and customer experience are working together hand in hand. So that's it. That's where things look. I like to thank everybody at PACE. I'd like to thank the prior speakers, and I'd like to thank Jeff and Casey and Sage and everybody at PACE for having me here. As I said, it's a tremendous honor to come here and share with you this perspective, and I look forward to hearing from any of you who are interested. There's a way to reach me right up here at my QR code. Reach out with questions, reach out to talk about CX, reach out to talk about the tremendous work that CX and CS can do together. And with that, I bid you a fantastic ACX21, and thank you for your attention, and thank you for attending. Jeff, I think back to you, or Casey. Hey, there you are.
It's me. All right. Thanks so much, Nick. This was fantastic. I really appreciate all the work that you did for us, and hopefully everyone has received your book. If not, we'll be doing a second mailing this week. So hopefully most people will get a book, and really good.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Casey.
All right.
Thanks so
everyone.
much for having me.